Hey bestie, it's time for your next session of Real Talk Friend Therapy with your favorite big sister auntie queen, Daisha Veronica. Hey y'all, hope you're having a great week so far. Your girl might be this close to landing a new job soon, which is super exciting. You would think being unemployed would make me more active on social, but because I have a lot of anxiety about being unemployed and looking for a job, it's just been harder for me. I just feel like, for better or for worse, it's like I know people make their livings off of social media, and I am one of those people that is aspiring to do that. But it still feels like a game, it's so unserious that even when you're trying to take it seriously, I'm like, I can't do this. So I really hope that I do land this job so that I can go back to feeling comfortable with engaging with the world. So know that I appreciate your patience with me. It was actually so cute. So Becky was here with me and she actually drove me to my interview. And then she was also here when they called to invite me to the second interview. And as I'm on the phone talking with them about the details, she comes over with my boyfriend because they can tell that, it sounds like I'm getting the second interview. And she's holding a sign that reads, "Fuck yeah." And they're dancing and they're celebrating me. So it felt really good to get that news with them around me. I felt very loved and supported, which are also key elements that are necessary when it comes to building vulnerability in our friendships. You like that segue I did there? God, it takes me back to high school. So we had this tradition that as seniors, everyone in your class got 15 minutes in front of the entire school to say or do whatever they wanted. We called it a chapel because it took place in our school chapel. And, when I say you could do whatever you wanted, I mean, you could do a dance, you could play instruments, you could hold us all in silence. I think someone did that one year. As long as you weren't being profane or extremely inappropriate, you could truly do anything. Most people prepared speeches that were basically little memoirs or life lessons of what they've learned so far. And this particular chapel will always stick with me. It was a guy talking about how he always got points off in his papers because his transitions were trash, moving from one paragraph to the next. So truly honoring who he was, every time that he was moving on to a new topic, he would just say transition. And it was so good. I honestly, when I'm planning out what I'm going to say for an episode, and I know that I need to get from one point to another point, I'm just kind of sometimes I really think back to that and I'm like, if only I could just be and transition. Honestly, not even just for the podcast. When I'm writing a play or a screenplay, if we could just say transition, it would be amazing. But anyway, a few weeks ago for Halloween, I did an episode on vulnerability because I know how scary it is to be vulnerable with others, especially when we're trying to navigate taking a relationship to the next level. Maybe it's someone you think would make a great friend, but you're not sure. So vulnerability can be a great way to test the depth of your relationship with others. But it's challenging because, as we talked about in that first episode, and if you have not listened to it yet, I highly recommend going back to listen to that first because it will really contextualize a lot of what we talk about in this episode today because we do reference it a lot in this episode. So I'd go back and listen to that. But so in that first episode, we talked about how it's challenging because it means we are opening ourselves up in a way that could also lead to our harm. But it's also so essential to friendship building and just relationship building in general that I wanted to sit down with a therapist to talk about why is it so hard, how we can face our struggles with it, as well as find opportunities in our day-to-day to practice it so that it's not as hard. Sharmishtha Gupta, who also goes by Shar, is a licensed mental health counselor. She got her degree out in New York with over 9 years of experience supporting adolescents and adults. Currently based in Singapore, her practice serves local and expatriate communities in Singapore as well as clients online in New York York and across Asia. As an adult third culture kid, her journey to develop her own sense of self has shaped her calling to help clients navigate cultural identity, adjustment, assimilation, and family dynamics. She aims to create a safe and supportive space for clients to fully unravel the layers of their individual experiences and find connection, meaning, and belonging in this ever so complicated world. Outside of work and sometimes in between sessions, okay, getting for real here, Shar enjoys naps and cuddles with her partner and 2 kitties, cozy gaming, and singing endless amounts of karaoke. I truly loved my conversation with Shar. I personally got so much healing out of this episode, and I hope it is able to do the same for you. Alrighty, here is my conversation with the amazing Shar Gupta. What's up, Shar? I am so excited
Hello.
to have you. How are you?
Thank you, Daisha. I'm so excited to be here too. I'm pretty good. I'm sipping my tea. I'm in Singapore, so it's not winter. It's like extremely warm, but I'm
Oh,
like in
wow.
the winter cozy feelings. So trying to
I
step
didn't
into that.
realize that the weather was different from what's going on here.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're a tropical island, so it's like same weather year round. So it's hot and humid year round. It's like a tiny bit cooler in December, January with like a bit more rain. So it's cold for us, but it's like warm summer for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh man. Wow. I did not know that. Yeah, it's so funny because I can see that it is so bright out. It is like
Yeah.
midday for you. It is pitch black over here for me.
Yes, yes. No, no. And I appreciate that we could make this work with like being really quite far away from each other. I'm like, I work with clients in the US and it's like such a struggle sometimes, like the time zone differences. But yeah, no, morning, getting my day started with you.
Well, as you know, the podcast is all about friendship. It is a space for us to get real. And today's episode, I'm sure, will be so real because it's all about vulnerability and specifically why is it so freaking hard to be vulnerable, especially when, like we love vulnerability in other people. We hate it in ourselves for some weird reason. And so I am
Mhm.
so excited to break down all of the nitty gritty about how we can be more vulnerable in our everyday and how we can practice that. But before we get into that, I'm just so excited to have the audience learn more about you. If you want to tell us about your work as a therapist, how long you've been doing it, the clients you serve.
Sure. So I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of New York. So that's where I trained, got my master's, worked for quite a few years with quite a diverse range of clients in quite a diverse set of settings. But I am originally from Singapore. And so I came back here during the pandemic and have had the opportunity to now work with folks here, which is really a mix of local Singaporeans and expatriate communities that are a little more my own background in Singapore. I grew up as an expat and I was very much part of like the international community here. I went to international schools. And so for me now, I work in my own private practice and I work with quite still a diverse range of clients, but some of the kind of common themes and issues that we work on are around identity, around mixed identities. I especially like working with third culture kids, which is what I identify as, where you kind of are sometimes in between or a mix of things that puts you in a little bit of a tug of war sometimes, and sometimes a little bit of a struggling to kind of find your place, right? It's not so straightforward kind of where you're from or what your home is or even what your cultural identity is. So that's tending to be the folks I work with now. I do tend to work with people on kind of broader issues of anxiety, of stress, of sort of managing some mood disorders. And then that's just an area that's sort of become a little more of my niche and a little more of like why people find me, because they resonate with that, with my background and with some of what I share about myself. And there's a little bit of understanding that helps when you have a shared experience, of course, as you know. So it's really, really rewarding. I think a lot of the journey, it's been 7 or 8 or 9 years now of like working in the field. A
Which
lot
is
of the journey
crazy
was
because
really
Shar and
tough.
I went to college together. We graduated
Yes.
in the same year. And it is nuts to me. The fact that our 10-year
Yes.
anniversary just passed. Like, what?
Yes. That's wild. I know. For me, high school 10 years was during the pandemic, like 2020. And so I kind of was really checked out of that. I didn't register that was happening. They didn't do anything as much as they would have. It was like something virtual. And so then that felt like a huge confusing time change. And then now, yeah, that it's been over a decade since we left school, since we left college. And yeah, so the journey was of being a therapist is not an easy one that I think a lot of other therapists who might be listening or who know, it's a lot of like putting in your dues or kind of really, really low pay, really not always the best supportive environments to be getting your licensure hours sometimes. But I think over these last few years, especially being able to be in my own practice too, it's really showed me that, okay, I actually do really love being a therapist. I think there was some doubt along the way, but it's like finally feeling like this is, exactly what I'm meant to be doing. It feels energizing. It feels meaningful. So I'm really glad. Yeah.
I hear it because my therapist, again, they are a real one. So they are honest with me about how like insurance is awful, which is so terrible because mental health services are so necessary and so needed. And it's awful that the insurance system really kind of works against people getting that access than it is about like making sure that people can have that access. And therapists just get the worst end of the stick when it comes to like payments for insurance. She explained to me that's why a lot of therapists, as soon as they kind of really get their bearings, they pretty much stop taking insurance because it's a hassle.
Yeah, no, it's such a struggle. It's such a sort of thing for people to wrestle with too, of that sometimes means that you can't work with as many folks as you would like to, or the folks that can't access private pay. And it's just something to really, it's a systemic issue for sure, that if, the systems aren't supporting the therapist, then they can't be providing the best therapy to their clients. And it just is like, I think I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about it, of like, you really have to be able to take care of yourself to be able to then, give more, or to be able to find other ways to reach, the people that aren't able to afford private pay therapy. But it's unfair. The system shouldn't be like that, for sure.
It's why I'm always like, woo, this payment's a lot, but I want you to get your money. So I will work what I need to work to pay you, but woo.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm so fascinated so did you grow up in Singapore?
I did. So I was born in India and I moved to Singapore with my family when I was 8 years old. And then I was in an international school here in Singapore up until I left for Scripps.
Wow.
So I grew up here, but I was in this like bubble of expat international school kids. And that's a really particular cultural space to be in. And so I wouldn't have, I like, my passport is Singaporean, which is such a privileged passport to have. So I'm so grateful, but I would never really relate to being Singaporean until I went to the US. And then that was the closest thing that I could use to describe myself. Like, I'm ethnically Indian, Singaporean, like status. But it was quite a journey because, especially then in college and in the US, that my Indian friends were more Indian and my Singaporean friends were more Singaporean. And I was always kind of in between. And again, I do think as I've gotten older and as I've gotten more settled into this like TCK identity of that it's just mixed, I think that is the comfortable sort of identity space that I feel more comfortable saying and connecting with other folks on. That, yeah, like there are people who can relate to that. There are people who grew up here who have similar identities. There are people who grew up in other parts of the world who have different identities but can relate to that experience of being in between, or kind of this enough or not that enough, right? And that's true for so many types of identities too. So yeah.
1,000%. Yeah. Even as a Black American woman, my dad is an immigrant from Nigeria. My mom is first generation, but her parents immigrated from Barbados. And so even within Black culture, like, yes, I am Black. I am like so Black. I am like all of the slices of Black that you can be. I still feel weird sometimes because I grew up in a very cultural household, both with my dad's Nigerian side and my mom's Bayesian side. And so like, I'm not always Black American feeling
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I'm so
Yeah.
fascinated by your international experience in terms of, going back to the conversation around vulnerability, because I'm sure, I mean, you have seen the gamut of what vulnerability is like in different cultures and how it can vary. So, yeah, I did an episode recently breaking down what vulnerability means, but I'm curious if you have your own way of defining it or thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciated your episode. I learned things that I had not known before, one of which was the word, like the wound, the meaning of like vulnus was
Oh,
like
yeah.
coming from wound. I thought that was really, that made sense, right? Like you just don't think about the meaning of words that much, I guess, when you're just like talking. But that, yeah, I think my definition, my understanding of vulnerability really comes from thinking about feeling safe and feeling comfortable enough to connect on a deeper level. And that vulnerability is that like act of connecting or act of allowing that connection to happen. And so I do think that I often think about it from a perspective of safety and of, why is it so hard for people is that there's so many reasons, but I think one of them is coming from that they don't feel safe enough. And I think that can be safe enough with people and also safe enough within themselves. So that's my definition. That's my sort of response to what vulnerability means to me.
Yeah, I'm curious, what's your own relationship with it? Have you ever struggled with being vulnerable, especially thinking about how you navigate all of these different cultures? If you have struggled with it, how do you manage it?
For sure. I think for me, I mean, it's like something that comes up with my clients all the time. It's a topic that we talk about. And this last week that I was thinking about us meeting, so many clients brought it up, and I was like, vulnerability, yes, yes, like notes, like let me keep this fresh.
I know what the people are looking for.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's just like, yeah, it's so important. It's so relevant. For me, I do think it's a really large part of my journey as a person and as a therapist. That is something I struggled with a lot. That I was a much more guarded and closed and sort of isolated person throughout childhood and like adolescence and early adulthood and like mid adulthood, like mid 20s as well. I would say that, yeah, I think sort of what we were talking about earlier of that there's so much figuring out where you fit in and figuring out who you connect with, and that wasn't very easy in the environments that I grew up in. That I did feel like there was a lot of self-esteem kind of impact that comes from not necessarily just like feeling uncomfortable in spaces or sometimes feeling like othered or like different from people. And so I do think that had impact on my comfort in being open with people. It was like, kind of have to be careful. You have to feel people out or feel spaces out in a really careful, guarded way is looking back at it now, how I would see myself. And I also think that a lot of what you talked about in the first episode too, of the sort of judgment and stigma around emotions, that's so prevalent in Asian cultures for sure, in like Indian culture, that I think there was a lot of judgment in the household I grew up in too, of like just really being able to express yourself or really being able to, especially with some of the differences that were happening, that like my parents' world and experience is different to mine growing up, that we were in a new country, that there's all these things that are unfamiliar and like more Western influence too, that like they were just not as comfortable with. And so I think that also informed some of my sort of hiding or guardedness around what's okay to share, what's okay to like or be interested in, that was not necessarily going to be accepted at home. And then in school with friends, that there's like all these sort of like social dynamics around coolness or just being like acceptable enough as a kid, as a teenager, as a person. So yes, I would say that all those forces were part of why I was like a really pretty closed person. And then and I've always had friends. This is something I also reflect on. I've always made friends. Like I've always been able to find somebody in most spaces I've been in, but it's the depth of that friendship and it's the sort of, again, safety of like some of the TCK experience too is that you tend to move, or your friends tend to move a lot. And so it's like there isn't necessarily the security that that relationship will continue, or that that relationship is going to be there for you. And so yeah, again, all these forces into kind of teaching me how to be a friend or how to be connecting with people. And then it like really showed up all through college, grad school, where I was like so much more able to expand my comfort zone. Like both of those environments like really pulled me out of my comfort zone, really kind of showed me different ways of relating to people, or that I had the privilege of like that being modeled to me, or people kind of helping, do that in some of these spaces. But I would say like I had like written this memory down of when I was in grad school, which like kicked my ass, like my master's.
Anybody who hasn't gone to grad school, where grad school made you like, I shaved half my head off my hair in grad school. Like you're just like, grad school puts everybody through it.
Oh, for sure. I am glad that you said that. I think I'm so in my therapist world too that like, we can commiserate like on what grad school was for us specifically, but no, for sure. I hear you. And like, especially also with clients who are going through it, and like PhDs and like all this like world of academia and intensity, that it's a lot. It's really a lot. But I have this memory basically in our first semester, we had a class called Foundations, which was role playing. Like you dive in and you're role playing counseling, and you're taking turns kind of doing both roles. And so that class was like really challenging for me to be vulnerable. It was a small group, but it was, people we just met, and it was this really intense setting of we're like learning the theories, and we're sitting in on lectures and kind of being trained on these kind of, dry sort of ways of learning about therapy. And then you're actually sitting in a seat and like asked to be the client or be vulnerable. And you could role play it in a acting kind of way, but that was also hard to do, right? It's like, I don't know, maybe it depends on the person, like what you're more comfortable with, sort of acting or just opening up. But I just remember that each of those sessions, which was like 3 hours long, like really intense, really emotionally draining, I would just want to go home and like recover after that. But in the process of that group is bonding. It was a group of 6 of us. And I just remember wanting to bond, because here we are kind of sharing all these like personal, intimate things about ourselves, opening the door to connection. And at the same time, it was just like a lot for me, because I wasn't used to it. I had really been so careful and guarded with most people that it really took a lot to, share. And for me, it was also therapy, like through college onwards, that like allowed me to do that. So it was still like, oh, this is the space I do that, not like outside of therapy that I'm like open or like able to sort of express myself in this emotional, vulnerable way. And I've been with my partner for a decade. We got together like just before grad school. So we were kind of figuring our thing out as well, but we were living together at that point, and he was definitely a safe and secure like person for me, like a, comfort, which again was like good because I had that to like get me through this really tough master's program, but also kind of gave me a fallback to then not necessarily stay in the uncomfortable zone with these people that we're trying to like figure this out with, like how much are we connecting? How much are we building here? And so all that to say, the memory I have is that there's one person in this group. We had this session that was like just intense. I don't really remember the content of it or what it felt like exactly, but it was intense. And so he suggested that we like go out and like hang out after, like a bunch of us, or at least 2 or 3 of us. And my immediate reaction was to say no. But like in my head, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. That was my immediate reaction. And I know now looking back, well, I was just overwhelmed, and I like just needed to sort of recover and maybe recharge. Like it was so taxing. But because I was so new at really being able to express myself and like be more honest about what I'm feeling or what I would need, which I think I've finally learned to do over these last few years of practicing it, I lied. I said like, oh, I have something else that I'm doing, right? I like avoided sort of honestly saying no or saying yes, which is another path I could have taken. Then I lied and said I had an appointment somewhere downtown, and this is in New York City, and like we were on the one train for school, and so he was like, okay, cool, I'll walk with you, I'm going the same way. And so then I had to go down because they're on like other side of the streets. This is up, which was home, and this is down to my appointment, my fake appointment. And it was so awkward and so unnecessary. And so I don't remember now if I like did that. Like, did I actually go down and then go back up, or did I make up a different excuse? But I do remember him being able to tell. I do remember that he could tell that I was wishy-washy, sort of just shady about it. Like I wasn't being honest. And so that moment has stayed with me so much, where I'm like, and I think that's happened in many different parts of my life, but that moment has stayed with me where I wish I had just been honest. And I wish that I also had the capacity to like keep hanging out and keep cultivating these like connections with this cohort, but I didn't. And I think that's also something I look back and like have compassion for, that I didn't. I was so emotionally spent. This was like such a challenging thing to do. It's such a challenging environment to be in. And so, yes. So I think when I think about vulnerability and when I think about my journey, so much of that has been self-acceptance and self-understanding of what my needs are, what my emotions are, what my existence in the world is, and then practicing being able to express that. And that is a tough thing. It's like really figuring out safety, really figuring out the right people, the right places to sort of help you practice it. And thankfully, I do feel so much more comfortable. I think from that, I think grad school was the really ultimate stretch of like learning it. And then the skills also of sort of social connection and emotional exploration, all of that really helped. And then when I moved here to Singapore 4 years ago, so that's my first time here as an adult. Like I've only really been a child here. And so I really like set out to sort of build communities, find, make friends, like reconnect with some people, but really intentionally sort of build more. And it's like a really good way to sort of contrast how much more comfortable I am with just saying yes to things, having the capacity to go to be open to things that are new and unfamiliar and people that are unfamiliar. And then also being able to sort of try to build those into deeper connections and deeper friendships. That it's still its own complicated journey for sure. But that I do think that for me, it's been just learning vulnerability and therefore being able to feel more comfortable in myself and with people.
Yeah. I mean, something that really pops up for me as I hear you talking is that how much self-reflection is involved in vulnerability as well. You have to be vulnerable to be able to look back at your past and think about how you could have done things differently. And I think some people were so harsh. And so it's like you also need to have self-reflection, but self-compassion and being able to look back and know. And I think just even hearing you articulate that, it's just like I don't think there was anything wrong with you acknowledging that you were overwhelmed and that you did not have the capacity to connect in this moment. I think, then coming up with the lie. But listen, I've been there. I've done it. Like,
Yeah. It's like, it's like sort of easier, I guess, or it was at that moment. I think maybe that's a signal of growth or of like more comfort with vulnerability, where it's increasingly hard for me to lie or to do the sort of white lie thing, right? It's like that takes effort. That takes sort of like a mask of some sort. Whereas in my younger years, the mask was easier. The mask was like lighter to put on than like actually like being honest or being vulnerable,
Yeah. Yeah. But it reminds me of how, I'm a playwright, so I've been in theater spaces throughout my whole life. And so it is like a demand of being in the space to be vulnerable in a way. But I understand, like, I literally had an experience where I was on a work trip and, I really just wanted to decompress and everybody else wanted to party. And I didn't want to feel like the loser. But part of me, when I look back at that now, I'm just like, but that's me creating that story in my head. Like, nobody called me a loser or no one was going to say that. I was just saying
Yeah.
that about myself. And it's just, especially for, we had a therapist on talking about boundaries, and like that episode really solidified for me how important it is to like honor our inner voice and the things that we need, and that what we need is not wrong. You know, we just have to express them. And 9 times out of 10, we write the worst story about how people are going to react. And most of the
Mm-hmm.
times, like, they're just going to be like, all right, cool. We'll see you tomorrow. Have
Yeah.
fun. Take a good
Yeah.
nap.
Yeah, for sure.
And okay, so vulnerability is so fascinating because while we hate to be vulnerable and we fight against it intensely, we also love it when other people are vulnerable. You know, I think about in those theater classes that I've been in where like everyone's like kind of quiet at first when someone asks like a really deep question. And then all it takes is that one person to really go deep, and then everybody wants to go deep. It's like the dam has broken. And so I'm curious, why do you think that is? Why are we so resistant in it in ourselves, but we love and are often inspired by vulnerability when we see it in others?
Yeah. Well, I think, what you've already said, which I think is one of the most important truths in life, is that vulnerability leads to connection. And that I think when we see that, when we experience that, when somebody is vulnerable with us or when somebody is demonstrating vulnerability, we experience that. We feel closer to them. We feel, inspired or sort of connected to them on an emotional level that is really powerful. And so I think that that's partly why we know, even if we have all these messages of showing emotions is bad, or, like to struggle is to be in a weak place. Like we have all these sort of messages from society ingrained deeply in there. But I think we physically, emotionally experience what vulnerability does in a positive way. And so I think that's why we appreciate it as a concept, and we appreciate it when we see it in other people. But I think that the reasons it's so hard is there's a few different ones that I was sort of thinking through, and that clients were bringing up with me. So, every day, that I think is like really easy to sort of maybe put them into a few categories. For folks who've been through different kinds of trauma, I think that you associate emotion or openness of any kind with danger. Something bad has happened to you. And so therefore you have maybe like your brain. Sometimes someone had told me this analogy of like, there's a skin around you that's like really primed and susceptible and sort of familiar with danger. And so therefore to consider, that's what leads to people putting walls up and putting guards up to protect them. And so therefore to consider putting that down is really uncomfortable, is really sort of just such a almost alien thing to imagine.
It goes against this response that you've created. It actually reminds me. So when I was little and I had my first crush, I told my family, and they weren't mean, but like the way they were like, oh, Daisha's got a little crush. And I kid you not, I never told them about anybody I liked ever again.
Yeah. I mean, it's like small, but it's not small. It's like, it's crushing. Like a little kid is like excited about something and then someone sort of shits on it. Like, even if it's,
they weren't shitting on it. They were just, but I don't know I just felt so embarrassed. And so like, and embarrassment is attached to shame. And so, like after that, like I was just like, oh man, like I shouldn't be telling people who I like, because then they're just going to like put it in my face.
Right. It wasn't mean. It wasn't like dismissive, but it was sort of attaching like it was attaching that like, oh, this is something you should be embarrassed about to it, which is sad. Like it, that's it. It shut you down.
From that, it's like I learned, and I've now had to unlearn that it is okay to share that I might like someone. And like, people are going to react the way that they react. But that hit me. I was like,
no, for sure. I think especially as children or as young people, we're so susceptible. We're learning, we're sponges, we're learning kind of what the world's about. How are you supposed to be as a human? And so any of these kind of like reactions get filed away as some sort of like lesson or rule. And it just takes, it takes identifying that. And then it takes trying to untangle that to fit better with the rules you want to live by, right? Like, what are the rules that make sense for you in this world? Yeah. So trauma, and like trauma can be such a wide range of how extreme that is versus how, like smaller moments or smaller events can still have impact, right, on us. I also think that, at least with the clients I work with, I think there's a couple different kinds of environments that people grow up in that helps sort of make this idea of why is it so hard to be vulnerable, or why is it so hard to be emotionally open. And I think that it's two extremes of how emotional your household was. So if it was like a really high emotion, high sort of reactive, maybe parents who didn't know how to manage their own emotions, who didn't know how to regulate themselves, that really like teaches a child to, there's no space for their emotions. There isn't a container for it. There isn't the capacity from a parent to help, address or regulate with their children. They're struggling, or they're unable to do so for themselves. The parents are. And so I think that's an environment that a child really learns to hide, or that there's just no space for them. There's no space for their emotions. And then the other end is kind of households where it's just like emotions are bad. Like, we just don't express that. Like you don't, it's just, there's stigma, there's judgment, there's just like, it's a bad thing to do. It's unfamiliar to them, to the parents perhaps, and the culturally or kind of experientially has just been something that's this is the way. And so I think that also, of course, then teaches a child, like, does not give them the skills of really being able to feel, and like that's okay to do, right? And so I think that again shows up in adulthood then, of that we didn't get that as children, or as like when we were learning, when we were sponges to do that. And then kind of, I think a little broader, which I think you talked about a lot already, but I think the things that I think why it's so hard for people to be vulnerable is feeling like they would be a burden on people if they were to share more, and then also fear of rejection. So I think those two are kind of hand in hand, but slightly different, where so many people say to me, like, I don't, like, I'm there for my friends, or I, show up in these ways, but I don't know that I can ask that of my friend. I don't want to be a burden, or I'm dealing with all these really hard things, and I think that would make my friends feel worse if I were to talk about it, if I were to share about it. And so I think that is a narrative that we tell ourselves that actually is really not likely to be true. And the way that I will poke at that with people is to say, well, what if this person were to share something like this with you? Would you feel like it was a burden on you, or would you feel connected to them? Would you feel like, oh, maybe it's an honor to be let in this way, or trusted with this sort of sharing? And most of the time they do feel that way, right? That's what vulnerability does, is it does show us that we can connect, we can relate, we can help, and helping makes us feel so good and sort of valuable, useful. Also, we can feel cared for, right? That this person cares for me in this way, that they would bring me in, and that I can demonstrate my care by helping or supporting or just listening. So in reality, I think those are, like I said, those are the things that vulnerability mean and bring. But we have the fear of being a burden. And I think that also the fear of rejection is maybe similar to, sort of, as someone had said to me recently, that if you don't even ask for something like a favor, or to hang out, or to show up at a time that you might need it more, you're not even giving that person a chance to say yes or no, to be able to gauge their capacity or be able to decide for themselves. You're deciding for them, right? You're deciding for them that they're not going to do that for you. And so it's I think it's all tangled in here of not wanting to burden, sort of, I'm not going to give you the opportunity to reject me because that's what I think you're going to do, or that's what I think is going to happen. And it's just sort of a negative spiral then, because then you keep yourself from connecting with those people, and you keep yourself from letting them show you that they might show up for you, they might help, they might support, they might be able to do that, and that it doesn't feel like a burden to them, but an honor, right? Or an opportunity to really deepen the relationship that you have.
Yeah, no, everything you're saying, I feel so hard And it makes me think about, because I wrestle with this with my mother,
Mm-hmm.
where there are moments where I was like, oh, wow, like I was vulnerable and, I didn't mean to be. And you were there for me. And I wasn't expecting of that. And that was so beautiful.
Mm.
And then there are times where I'm vulnerable and she is the way that she typically is. Because I would say I grew up in a household where we were not very open with our feelings, or if we were open with our feelings, it's not so much that we were rejected, but I just think, my mom grew up in an immigrant household and my grandparents were, like, it's just, it's a
The priorities were different. The priorities
yeah.
were,
So my mom
yeah.
is very much a pragmatic, like she just doesn't do emotion stuff, but she shows her love, but she's not going to be like, "Oh, baby." Like she's just
Mm.
more like, "Okay, like I'll help you get to your doctor's appointment." And that's kind of her saying that she loves you, but she's not the feelingsy words
Yeah.
type. And
Yeah.
so I know that for me personally, that's where I struggle with vulnerability when you have someone, because it's like you said, I love, I think the most beautiful part of being vulnerable is when you have a moment and that person rises to the occasion and gives you the support that you were seeking, right? And so I've been on the receiving end of that with some people where, like, maybe I wouldn't have chosen to be vulnerable with you. It just kind of happened because I needed to express my feelings. And I love that. But then there are times where I've been trying to be intentionally vulnerable. And then I'm just like,
Hmm.
okay, well, that
Yeah.
didn't go the way I was hoping it
Yeah, you didn't get what you needed, or that maybe with your mom, that you're saying that maybe it's even like about like sort of love languages,
would.
that she demonstrates love and care in these ways, but that when there's something in particular you're looking for, especially in those moments where you're like intentionally sharing or opening something up, that's not been a usual dynamic, or that's not been a comfortable thing to do, especially with her, perhaps, right? And so I guess I hear that, and I think it can feel then like either like dismissal or rejection, that this person isn't able to show up. And I guess, yeah, I would say maybe like if it helps to sort of translate for yourself, right? Okay, this is the way in which she's trying to show it. It's not the way I
Yeah.
needed,
I
right?
guess what's challenging, I think, when I think about her in particular, is the fact that it's like, I never know what I'm going to get.
Mm. Yeah.
Because it's like, again, like you want to leave space for people to surprise you. Sometimes they meet your expectations exactly, and then sometimes they do surprise you. And I feel like in this conversation about vulnerability, I think that's a struggle that people, it's almost like if they can't expect what they need from you all the time, then they're just like, I don't want to do it at all. Because it's
Right.
like this
Right.
like 50-50 guessing game of if I'm
Right.
ever
It's
going to
too
get it or
risky.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm curious because I also just kind of feel like, is that built into the process, or is that something we should learn how to be comfortable with, or is my mom just a weirdo?
No, your mom sounds very relatable, very familiar as a type of
She's gonna
mom and
drag me
person.
too. She was out here calling me a weirdo.
No, she is who she is. I don't think she's a weirdo. I think that's a good question. I would say yes. When things feel too risky, we're gonna err on the side of caution, and especially with each person's individual tolerance of risk. Let's say, right? Maybe we have a lot of security systems, security built into ourselves. We can tolerate more risk if we have that, and if we have less of that, then we're more cautious and we're less likely to like take a risk like that. Generally, I'd say the process that I would recommend and I work on with folks is to start with safer people and safer places, like where okay, this is likely to be the response, right? And therefore, for some people, that's therapy. If you can find the right therapist and the right fit, then that's what they're trained to do, is to understand you, is to support you, is to sort of provide that space, right? That should hopefully, ideally, therefore never harm in ways that sometimes people can unintentionally, right? In relationships, we are always we're never perfect at it. So I think for some folks that's therapy, where if you can practice vulnerability, if you can practice opening up, if you can practice sharing in a safe, ideally place, then that allows you to then build up your security and tolerance of risk to do it outside with more people, with maybe further out people as well. But then, yeah, even in situations where you're not going to therapy, you're not able to do that, or you haven't found the right place for that, that to start with the people that you can have more reliable sort of reactions from, or know that they've given you indications of being a safer person, of being a person you can be more vulnerable with. And then even the sharing and the opening up can be smaller to begin with, right? To really practice just expressing your thoughts and feelings, just expressing your opinions about things more. And then that, I think, sort of, it's like a muscle. You build it, you see like, okay, the worst didn't happen. 9 out of 10 times it is actually good and helpful and sort of connects you to people. And then you build that more with, and then it helps, I think, because yeah, there's always going to be people close to us who have the potential to hurt us, or have the potential to be, imperfect with how they respond to our vulnerability. And yeah, it's like building a large enough muscle to do it, and also just building safety and security in yourself and in enough of your support systems to make it easier to then push more and do that more. That's what I think. Yeah.
No, and I love that. And it's making me think. So in the boundaries episode, we talked about emotional boundaries and how like you don't have to give all the details to all the people, and that you can kind of parse out how you share information. And that I think so many people are fearful of lying or not being fully truthful, but that is a boundary, and that you get to set that. You don't have to tell somebody all of the details of your experience.
Yeah, totally. I think also that there's so many parts of us that not everybody gets, or not everybody can understand. And I think that it's great to have friends and people who you feel safe and connected to, and that there's still going to be things that differentiate them. There's going to be this friend that is better at doing this, or better at connecting with me on this, and I'm going to be intentional with what parts of me I'm opening up and bringing to the table. And that doesn't always mean like hiding. I think it's just being intentional, right? That this is what helps us like connect and sort of energize us. And here with a different person, this is a different thing.
Yeah. So we did an episode on the podcast a few weeks back that was all about what we can learn from kids about making friends, because like kids are pros at making friends and adults are just kind of stuck on the struggle bus. Okay. So, and I think part of the reason why is that kids just have such a lower threshold when it comes to expressing vulnerability. It's much easier for them to just kind of blurt out if they're having an issue or a problem or whatever it is. And so I'm curious, in your experience, like how do you think we lost touch with that ability to be vulnerable as a child as we moved into adulthood?
Yeah. I think it's sort of speaking to that we're born with like the mechanism for vulnerability. Like we're born with the sort of wonder and openness, perhaps, that maybe gets like stamped out of us a little. Like a lot of, especially some of those, like I think of kids who are openly playing and sort of like in their fantasy worlds and sort of like doing, like sort of embracing how they have fun. And then like somewhere in those middle school, elementary school, somewhere there, it's like you start getting judged for it, or like someone makes a comment that's like, that's weird, right? Like what a weird way to be, or like something, or even an adult, or even someone else like makes a comment that sort of makes you feel, or like, there's like judgment of that as like being childish, to like be sort of open and playful, and like that's like a bad thing to be. So I guess I feel like, yeah, a lot of the sort of societal messages of how you're supposed to be start building up over like a lifetime of like going through school, going through early adulthood. And I think for some folks that just like builds up in really deeply ingrained restrictive messages of like, I can't be like there's just, this is the expected way, this is the expected path, this is the stuff I'm supposed to do, this is the way I'm supposed to be. I see that a lot with especially kind of people in their 20s, like, figuring out what they want to do for work, figuring out what their next kind of steps are, that there's like so much of what's expected. And so I think that's one of the reasons, like, we get boxed in a lot over a lifetime.
Is there a
Yeah.
way for me, like, I think about, did you ever read the book Stargirl?
I didn't. It's familiar, but I didn't read that.
Yeah,
No.
Stargirl was about this girl who was just she just lived her own life in her very unique way, and it dealt with themes of like how like kids just thought that she was so weird. But again, I'm at a point now as an adult where I'm like, oh, being weird isn't the worst thing that you can be, and it's actually the weird people that are like so much more fascinating and
Yeah.
interesting than the quote unquote cool people. And I'm curious, as someone that would like to have children one day, like, is there a way that I can get my kid to hear the word weird and be like, oh, cool, like, I'm weird?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. I think that is something that a parent and a family can like help buffer a child from some of the outside world, knocking down kind of some of these, just like what's inherent to that person, like what their personality is, what they like, what they're interested in. That if a family can really support that and validate that and affirm that, then it's easier for the kid to like hold on to that, even if other people are deeming it to be bad, right? Which happens. Like, kids are judgmental, adults are judgmental, like we are all judgmental in some ways, and it's just the way in which we're expressing that to people that matters, right? You can have all your judgments, but it's when people really like impose them that people get affected by it and knocked down by it. But I totally think that a parent can cultivate that for a child. I've seen some really like sweet videos of people doing that, of affirming their kids, of just affirming that like who they are is awesome, who they are in every way is exactly what they should be. And that if that's what we can cultivate in a child and have that be the foundation for them to grow in, like, that's so beautiful. That's, wonderful. And I think the world is always going to have some negative impact. Like, there's always harshness out there, but the more you're like buffered and more you're protected and sort of have that sort of safety, security around you, the easier it is to hold on to it for yourself, right? To hold on to that.
Yeah. So I grew up with a common misconception about vulnerability, which is that it is weak to be vulnerable. It is weak to cry. It is weak to admit that somebody hurt your feelings or that something may have gotten to you. And as an adult, I know fundamentally that is not true, and that like it is good to especially share when someone has hurt you. But in the moment of dealing with that hurt and my feelings, my just immediate response is to disengage and just to like, in the vulnerability episode, I talked about how my uncle's wife said something really terrible to me. And immediately, instead of crying, which is what I wanted to do, I like swallowed so hard all of the pain that I was feeling. And so I'm curious, how do you think that we can unlearn that desire to stifle our feelings in the moment? To a degree, I think I was sensing unsafeness, which is why I didn't do it with her, but I did cry in front of my boyfriend. But I also I feel like people also need to learn that they just can't say anything when they want to say it. And that there could have been power in sharing that emotional response with her. So I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah. I listened to that, and I think you did what you could have done in that moment, which is, it sounded like protective to shut down the feelings, right? Like to sort of stifle in that moment, that it didn't feel safe to sort of challenge or express, but that you then tended to yourself and you shared with your boyfriend that you got support that did help and validate like what you were feeling, which was valid, right? Like, it was a shitty comment and like shitty attitude around like body and weight and all that. But anyway, I think that you did the best you could. I guess like, what would you want to do differently? Like, what would you have wanted to have, what could you imagine saying that was more challenging?
Well, okay, there are like two ways that I think about like what maybe I could have done differently. The first way is like literally just having let my emotions flow and letting her see the impact of what she was saying,
Mm,
because and maybe this isn't my weight to carry, but it's like, I hate that she got to walk away not
mm,
knowing the pain that she caused me by what she said and how she said it. But then I also, because again, I'm somebody where I'm just like, I just be wanting to fight. I'm like, let's go. But I'm also like, I recognize that maybe that's not the work that was necessary. Like, like that's her own shit that she has to deal with. And my shit is recognizing that, I got what I needed from who I needed it
mm,
from. And that was my boyfriend. And so
mm.
sometimes I'm like, is that something that would have been helpful if I had cried in front of her? Would it have made sense for me to do it so that I could at least feel like she knows the impact of what she did? And then, the other part of me is trying to do the too cool for school. And I wish that I had just been like, hey, that was a really fucked up thing you said. How
Yeah.
would you like it if I said that about your weight because you're not looking that trim yourself? But it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know how helpful that would be either. She might have just gotten pissed off. I don't.
Yeah. And also I mean, I think what I hear is like a few different needs, and that one was to just be sort of for someone, or for her, but for anyone to witness how bad that felt and to sort of validate that for you, which it sounds like that need then got met by your boyfriend and by your own self-validation. But then this other piece of accountability of her having to sort of sit with, like, here's what I caused, right? Here's what I impacted this person in this emotional way. I feel like for me, I just think of it as which one feels worse or easier at the time, or which one do you have the capacity for at the time, right? Which one's more important perhaps at the time? And I feel like because your reaction was to sort of stifle, that's like your instinct or intuition kicking in of, I don't have the safety to really like show it all here in this place. And therefore, that one maybe was the one you needed more, right? Was to protect yourself from that and go get support elsewhere. I think in another time or in a different space, that maybe I want to show this to this person so they really see it would have been a louder or larger, kind of more important one for you of the two, perhaps, right? Like, I just don't think it's black and white of like which one's right or wrong. I think they just sound like all important, and that sometimes one is most important or one is more important, and we just have to try to honor, right, what we need most in a moment like that.
Oh, I love that. When you talked about intuition, I'm like, oh my gosh. It like clicked for me that I knew what was best for me in that moment, even if I didn't feel it. Because, we all go back and we're just like, oh, if I could have done it over, I would have done
For sure.
it. And, now I love that I can walk away being like, no, like you did what you needed to do in that, like that it was bigger than you just like using your thinking brain, that like
Yeah.
all of you made a decision that was what was best for you. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In that moment, in that time, to sort of
I
trust.
appreciate
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, how can we find opportunities in our day-to-day to practice being more vulnerable? How can we lean into building this skill so that I can one day be like, hey, no.
Yeah. Well, I think what I had said earlier about start small by just expressing small things, right? Because that one's a really challenging one. That one's like so emotionally complicated. Like, it's about your feelings and her feelings and these like bigger sort of dynamics around body and all this stuff. So I feel like it's to start, if you're trying to practice vulnerability and for yourself that it's a challenge or it's an extra sort of difficult area in your life, then I think starting small. And I do also think a large part of that is starting with yourself. Like, can you be vulnerable with yourself? Can you really sit down and like let yourself feel? Are you not just sort of like distracting away or pushing away sort of the things you're feeling, the things you're experiencing day to day? It really takes that part of it first. I feel that I mean, of course, we're always leaning on people, and it's so important to lean on people, that we're not in isolation. We don't need to think of it as I have to take care of myself only. Like what we're talking about with vulnerability is we need people, and it's beautiful and wonderful to have people to build with and to connect with. But I do think that it takes so much of doing that with yourself as well. If you're not able to stay with your own feelings, how are you going to express that to somebody else? And how are you going to give them an opportunity to see you fully in that way? So I think also practicing, like things like journaling or things like just like taking a moment to sort of check in with yourself. It's really easy to just move through life not doing that. Like just go, go, go. Something happens, you sort of semi feel it, but push it away. But to really like be able to sit with it, I think that is a part of honesty and sort of building the capacity within yourself to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about, we talked about the way that you look at vulnerability as creating a sense of safety for yourself. And so I'm curious how you coach people or help people think about creating that space of safety within themselves.
Yeah. So often, because one of the reasons it feels so unsafe is because the feelings are really complicated or big, or heavy, intense things have happened, right? That have made people either block things out or hide away from their feelings, or sort of, again, like their body is protecting them from fully feeling things, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So I think that when I work with clients like that, when I work with people who aren't feeling safe in themselves, it's a really careful, really intentional process of you're in a safe space. We're first creating a safe space together that there's enough evidence of me being someone they can do that with, where we look at things, we open things up, and that if they can do that with me, if they can tolerate sort of looking at it, feeling it, understanding it, then they can do it by themselves. And then they can sort of just, again, build the tolerance of it in a way that makes them more confident, right? That I can handle this. I can feel this. I'm not going to be overwhelmed or destroyed by it. There's potential, right? There's really big, intense feelings and experiences that can do that. But so I think to answer your question of like, how do we build safety? We also need the people in our lives to provide that for us, that we can't only do it by ourselves. We can't only be, we are not able to sort of just like, I think, all the stuff going on in the world right now, there's like such an intense period of like fear of like what's going to happen. There's so many real threats, right, out there in the world. I think that it's like even more important to know that what helps get through that is to be connected to people, to be building community, to be supporting and caring for each other. That's what's within your circle of control, and it's so important.
A really great segue into my next question, which is, if you had a vulnerability checklist, what would be on it? Like, what are the signs or the conditions that we should look for in people that signal that, oh, this is a great person or opportunity or time to be vulnerable?
Yes. I love that question. I want to do that more. Like I want to actually like do that with clients, like come up with, I think it will look a little different for everybody. But I think for me, what makes sense to sort of look out for is people who are emotionally attuned to you. So they're like listening to you in a way that's really intentional. Like they actually want to know you. They are demonstrating that they're listening to listen. They want to know you wholly. And so when you experience that, then that like really indicates that this person, is also skillful enough to have space for you, right? Like they have the ability to have space for you, which I think is a skill, is a capacity indicator. What are the other things? They listen without like judging, without sort of the non-judgmental, sort of the space that they create for you is non-judgmental. They respect your boundaries. So I think if you have expressed something that you don't like, or that you would like from them, or that you're uncomfortable about, or anything, right? Like if you're setting some sort of boundary, or you're expressing some sort of boundary, and they show you that they A, understand it, and B, respect it, I think that's a really important indicator for that this is a safe person, and that they validate you. I think even if people don't understand exactly what you're going through or exactly what you're saying, that they don't have to validate you. Like they can still want to, make you feel understood and validated without necessarily fully relating or like experiencing it themselves. So I think those are my like green flags. I think I also have like a medium one, which I think you talked about in the first episode too, which was if somebody shares with you, right? If somebody opens the door and is vulnerable with you, I think that one can be good, but I think that one shouldn't be the only reason to then say, okay, this is a safe space or person, because they could be oversharing, right? They may not be able to demonstrate all those other things I said of like being able to hear you and support you just because they felt they were okay to share, right? They might have felt comfortable and able to do that, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to provide you a safe space. So I think for some people that is like they open the door and that sets the tone perhaps, or that tells me it's okay to, and it can be, but I think to just like make sure other signals are in place before you walk through the door, because it's just not a guaranteed safe space just because they were comfortable opening it. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I actually really love that add-on. Okay, so I think one of the most scariest parts about being vulnerable is just not knowing how someone is going to respond. And so let's say we deem someone worthy of our vulnerability and we express and share something with them and we experience rejection on the other end. Is there anything we can do on our end to manage our emotions in that moment? And I don't mean stifling those emotions, but is there a way to respond that allows us to feel dignified?
That's such a good question. I guess even just thinking about your example with your aunt, I wonder if there is a middle ground then, right? Between like, I show you everything I'm feeling in this moment, which might be a lot of big feelings because it doesn't feel safe to do that, right? Like my intuition is saying like that's not safe enough for me, and swallowing. Like maybe the middle ground is like a small expression of an ouch or like a or like sometimes like the way I suggest to people that they practice like pausing. So like even when I had like automatically lied back then when I was like not wanting to be honest, I think the sort of practice of, rather than a default response, that you sort of give yourself space to think about it first and sort of really check in with yourself first. So even like a like give me a moment, or like something that feels a little more organic to you, to say like give me some time to respond to you, because I think our automatic responses are, ones that are sometimes more vulnerable or more kind of, we want to be intentional with how we show them or feel them. So yeah, I think like when there's a rejection or when there's something that doesn't feel good in a moment that you've really been vulnerable in, it took a lot maybe to do that. I think it sort of sounds similar to what we had said about like, you got to choose what's most important in that moment, like to protect yourself, to express something, to maybe give you more space to decide how you want to react or respond to this person, or to just, if you have the capacity to just be fully open and expressing what you're feeling. Because I guess like maybe this isn't realistic, but what's the harm, right? You've already experienced the rejection. You've already experienced something that didn't feel helpful to you. Maybe it's like this wasn't the right person, or this wasn't the right time. I think often in those situations too, I think it's a reflection of that person not having either the skill or capacity. Like it's not about you if they weren't able to hold or respond to what you were sharing, right? Usually I think that would be the case. It's not about you. But I think in that moment it's hard to necessarily see that or feel that. In the moment you're having a reaction of hurt or of anger or of upsetness. So yeah, again, I don't know there's right or wrong. It's like what's most important to you, right? And that could be different with a different person at a different time. Is there room to just be fully continuing to go for it, right? With that person and say, this is how they impacted you.
Yeah. I think especially when I think about my example, I think what can be challenging is that, again, we all have this, I know that I fight this feeling of like, I don't want to look weak, which is why I think that it was so challenging for me to, it's like, there's a part of me that's like, oh, it would have been nice to express, but I didn't because I didn't want to look weak. And I always want to go towards looking strong. But at the same time, I don't think my like ideal rebuttal of like shooting it back at her also would have been great for me either.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, part of it could also be it. I think it's, again, just doing more work on that perception of like looking weak, and that, you know, my response, which in that moment was to not like that, it was protective and that it was not weak for me to do what I did.
Yeah.
Nor would it, like, if I did express, nor would that have been weak either. But again, going back to what you said, that it really is just about what do you need, and like really trusting your whole self to know that it's going to do exactly what you need it to do in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I just also have been thinking of the word control, that I feel like you're saying I want to continue to challenge the emotions equals weak, or expressing emotions equals weakness, right? But I think that maybe I'm also sort of now thinking our emotions are emotions, right? They're not weak, or they're just what they are, and that's what we experience as a way of reacting and existing. Like, that's a human thing that we have our emotions. But maybe that to show them in a way that feels out of control, versus to feel like we've checked in with ourselves and we're being intentional with how we express ourselves, is more I'm in control. And it's both are emotional, right? But one is maybe like feeling more in control of how you then want to intentionally express yourself. So maybe there's something there too of how to react, and vulnerability is sort of maybe somewhere in there of I want to feel intentional, or I want to feel careful about how I say things, versus I feel safe enough to express myself here in this moment. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when I think back into that moment, I think my fear was that I probably was gonna, like, if I express, I'm not gonna have any sense of control. Like, it is just gonna be like really ugly. And
Yeah.
I think there was a part of me that's like, I don't know if I think that that's helpful, or if I want to show that side of myself. And then sometimes, again, I'm like, man, that bitch deserved it. She deserved to get all of this. Well, okay. Is there anything that you would love to contribute that I didn't ask you?
Well, I guess one thing I really wanted to share was a song that I used to listen to in like college, which is Brave by Sarah Bareilles. Do you know that song?
I feel like I must, because Sarah Bareilles was like she had 2012 to 2014 on
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah, it just like popped up in my head over these last few days that I was like thinking about our topic of vulnerability, and it's called Brave, and she's just like, it's just like a hype song, like it's like so encouraging. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Love it. And so actually I was like, okay, it's kind of old now. Maybe there's like, maybe people aren't, I don't know, into Sarah Bareilles anymore, but I just love that song, and I just thought about it, and I wanted to like suggest it if anyone needs a hype song for, trying to like take a step of vulnerability, of like go for something or say something, right? Like she's encouraging you in that song, and I love it so much.
Oh my God, I love that, and I'm probably gonna go listen to it after we're done.
Yes, you should.
Oh my gosh, Shar, it was so amazing. I feel like you gave me, like, personally, like, gifts for myself of like, it's okay. It's okay that you didn't lose it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, I mean, and I just appreciate, getting to chat with you, and that I've been listening to your podcast. I love it. I think it's so important. Like, it's just like such an important topic. I think relationships, non-romantic like relationships, are so important, and not as much focus is on them as romantic ones. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that you have this podcast. It's like so important.
Thanks. Yeah. I love having the space, and it's crazy how I've even noticed in my own friendships the depth that our conversations go when I talk to them about what I'm going to talk about on an episode. And like, yeah, I feel like it's like indirectly really deepened the relationships that I
Mm-hmm.
have. So I love
Mm-hmm.
doing this work. Okay, so to close out each episode, we play a game called Scroll Double Tap
Mm-hmm.
DM. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of forgot, but I got
Mm-hmm.
an idea as to what your Scroll Double Tap DM could be as you were talking. So for
Mm-hmm.
you, I'm going to do the 3 countries that you have experienced. So the United States, India, and
Ooh.
Singapore.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's such an intense
I mean, I
question
did
then.
just scroll
Okay.
past the US. The US is trash right now, but
That's so funny. I actually just visited India a couple weeks ago with my family for my sister's getting married, and so we're doing wedding shopping.
oh my
So it
God,
was
I'm
so it's
so jealous. Indian
it's
wedding
a lot.
fashion?
Yeah.
Holy shit. Y'all
Yeah.
do it right. Like, I would want to marry an Indian just for the wedding.
you, I hope for you that well, whatever you could use that in any wedding or in any celebration, like the level of intensity that Indian weddings can be. So yeah, so I think India is a pretty stimulating and chaotic place, and then wedding stuff is also stimulating and chaotic. So it's just been like very stimulating and chaotic, but also fun for sure. Okay, it's so hard. I think at this moment, because I've been in Singapore for a while and I feel a little more settled and grounded, I'm gonna have to scroll because
Okay.
it's like not as interesting. Like I've found my place, like it's like I can I don't need to stay with it as much. And so then in the US, I'm like, I miss my people. Like there's so many people, there's like so much shit that like I'm feeling for them and with them, and like some clients still too. So I feel a little more empathy and like connection to the US at this moment. So maybe that one's like, and then DM can be India because it's like, yeah, it's a lot to like navigate with just visiting, just like my family, like some of my family's there, so just like sort of it's rich in like what it means to me, what it means to my family, all that stuff, so there's room to like dive in more. Yeah.
Oh my God. I I love that you can look at what's going on in this dumpster of a country and still give it a little heart. I love that. We all know how I feel. So the US, I'm scrolling real hard past right now. But you know what? We can
Oh.
also say that it's because I'm very familiar. I know her inside and out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then I would give a little like to India because like I love the fashion. Oh my gosh, so when I was in grad school, I got to take this fashion class. I'm trying to remember
Mhm.
specifically what it was. And so we did a whole segment on Indian fashion. And I was just like, you guys, you just have it going on. Like you guys are doing it right. I love it. And then I think I'd actually DM Singapore only because I don't know that much about it. And so like I'd be very curious to learn more.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, it is an interesting place. I felt bad scrolling past, but it's an impossible question. But yeah, it's an interesting place. It's got its own interesting history, and it's like a really multicultural city. It's a city. It's not even like it's so different in that way too to most other places. So yeah.
No, I love that. Okay, so where can the people find you if they want to connect more with you, if they're maybe interested in seeking out your services? Where can they reach you out?
Sure. So the best place to connect would be my website. It's odysseywellness.co. I have an Instagram that has been like a expansion of my comfort zone this year, like a project to sort of play around with, which is also Odyssey Wellness. And then I will also just share my LinkedIn if people want to just connect with me as a person, as an individual. I work with clients in Singapore and New York, and then a few parts of Asia. So if you're in any of those places and you want to work with me, then I'm here. And also my cat is yelling. Can you hear him?
I heard a little bit.
He waited till the end of this, thankfully, but now
How
he's basically he wants to go out, and so he's yelling for me to open the door. But yeah, that's just what it is.
Okay, well, I will let you let him out. It was so wonderful chatting with you. I can't wait to have you on the podcast again.
That would be amazing. It was so much fun. It felt like 5 minutes. That's always the marker for me of like when something feels good. It's like quick feeling. So I really appreciated it. It was really great to chat.
So, as I was editing this episode and listening to it again, I wrote down for myself this note that said, support and accountability do not need to happen at once. And I want to share that with you all because I think that was such a crucial piece of healing that I really needed from that moment that I had with my uncle's wife. I think when we are hurt or rejected, we immediately want to have all of the things. We want support, we want accountability, and maybe even retribution. But this convo really solidified for me that all of those things don't need to come at once. And it truly is about getting yourself what you need in that most immediate moment. And sometimes you might have the capacity to ask for accountability, but other times you might not. And it's not weak or small of you to seek support first and then hold them accountable later. Or honestly, not at all. I think it goes back to that question that I love from The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, which is, do we want justice or do we want peace? And I think in our current society, we are so obsessed with holding people accountable without taking the time to understand if that accountability is really going to help us heal. Is it actually what you need to move on? Or is it what you think you need or what you think you should be seeking? So all of this is to say that I love the way Shar put it, that your emotions are just your emotions. So instead of judging them, let's learn how to feel them and have compassion for them and for what our body is telling us that it needs in that most immediate moment. All right, besties, that's all we got this week. Remember that next week is our last episode of the season. But then I'll be back for season 2 in early February. But if that sounds like way too long from now, make sure you are following me and Yes Queen on social media for updates and bonus content that I will be releasing in between that time. And then we also have On the Couch, that Patreon exclusive web show featuring me and my producer bestie, Becky Harris, talking about everything we're doing and seeing and experiencing in the world and how it relates to our friendship and just friendship in general. And then our free Facebook group where you can connect with other listeners and talk about moments from past episodes. The break will be a great time for you guys to catch up if you haven't been able to listen to all of them. And I know I've been a little MIA with the group, but during this break, I'm going to take time to get us all set up and get the vibes rolling. So definitely make sure you join us for that. All right, sending lots of love and hugs, besties. I will catch you later. Ya girl is out. Loving Real Talk Friend Therapy? Of course you are. So don't forget to show us some love with a 5-star review wherever you are listening and to join our Patreon to unlock bonus recordings, videos, private chats, and more.